An Iraqi national is charged with planning several terrorist attacks here in the U.S. as retribution, according to the criminal complaint, for the U.S. war in Iran. President Trump wraps up a two-day summit in China with the future of arms sales to Taiwan in some measure of doubt, and scant details available, at least currently, on future Chinese purchases of American jets and soybeans. Plus, the Trump administration weighs an indictment against former Cuban dictator Raul Castro over the downing of civilian aircraft off the Cuban coast in the mid-1990s. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. We've got a lot to get to in this program, and we're going to start with the significant arrest of the man pictured on the right. And what you see, his arm draped around notorious terrorist Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani, very briefly, was commander of the Quds Force in Iran. He was killed in 2020 in a targeted effort by the Trump administration to take him out of the battlefield. The man not named Qasem Soleimani is accused and was today of planning terrorist attacks here in America. Also, President Trump now heading back from China following a two-day summit, the economic and geopolitical fruits of which are, to put it mildly, opaque. Additionally, the Trump administration appears to be mulling an indictment of Fidel Castro's brother over something that happened 30 years ago. And if you're wondering, the answer is yes. It is part of an ongoing campaign, economic, judicial, and diplomatic, to pressurize the existing Cuban regime. Plus, on the program, California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna and Michigan Democratic Senate candidate Mallory McMorrow. We start with the arrest of an Iraqi national with a track record of terrorist attacks in Europe. This story is developing. We're getting new details literally by the moment. And for that, we turn to Anna Schechter for what we know right now. Anna, tell us.
Well, this Iran-backed militia leader had been linked to 20 plots throughout Europe and Canada. So this is very real. This is not just somebody messing around with buddies in Telegram. This is a very, very real, very serious plot. In fact, according to this indictment, he wanted to carry out attacks in Los Angeles and New York, targeting a prominent synagogue, my sources tell me, in Manhattan. So right at the heart, right where I'm sitting right now, likely within a several block radius. But our sources say they do not want to name the synagogue for fear of bringing in more threats or a potential attack. So this is very serious. He was extradited from Turkey, brought overnight to New York City, and just a few hours ago, he was in court downtown in federal court at his first hearing, facing terrorism charges and a charge involving a plot to bomb a public place, which we understand is the synagogue that I've just been referencing, Major.
And Anna, what do we know, if anything, about potential motives?
Well, absolutely. This is in retaliation for the war in Iran that the U.S. and Israel are waging against Iran. And that is why prosecutors say this individual and his group was targeting Jewish sites and Israeli sites throughout Europe and now in the United States. And they wanted to bring this indictment and get him out of operation before he could successfully carry out an attack here in the homeland. Because guess what? His group carried out attacks in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, and were plotting in Canada as well.
It would stand to reason, Anna, that this, from the U.S. perspective, should not be the only arrest. If it is a group, they must be looking for other people.
That's right. He is just a central key person. He was not only involved in the planning of these attacks, but he had this broader propaganda role. He was close with, as you mentioned, Soleimani. So he was a very high-ranking person getting direction from the Iranian regime, according to intelligence sources and this indictment. So they are really going for leadership. Of course, there are going to be a plethora of people who worked under him to carry this out. One thing interesting in the indictment, they had communications, his texts. He was sending photos, maps of this synagogue to others in preparation for this attack. So absolutely others involved in these plots here on the homeland.
And the criminal complaint suggests that that attack at that synagogue was possibly quite imminent. Anna Schechter, thank you very, very much. President Trump heading back to Washington, as I mentioned at the top of the program, after the summit with Xi Jinping. The president, on his way back, touted, quote, fantastic trade deals, unquote, between the U.S. and China. Our Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House. Ed, what do we know, if anything, about how fantastic these things are?
Well, Major, if you're someone who works for or invests in Boeing, it is indeed fantastic. The big major aviation company just a few minutes ago confirming that it now has a commitment from China to purchase at least 200 aircraft, quote, and we expect further commitments will follow after this initial tranche. That was a big goal of the company to restart relations and business with China after several years of not having it. And Boeing was among the companies represented on this trip by their top executives, the president bringing many of them with him to China to demonstrate the eagerness of American companies to continue investment and business in that country. But beyond that, we don't have much more in terms of what exactly the major trade deals are that have been cut. Now, typically after this kind of a big trip, it takes a few days perhaps for the paperwork to process, the I's to be dotted, the T's to be crossed. And so we'll see maybe by Monday, Tuesday, if we have any better sense of what else economically, at least, was worked out. On the global problems front, if you will, the president signaled that China said to him it will not be providing military aid to Iran. But, of course, it was in your interview with the Israeli prime minister last weekend where he signaled that perhaps China was, in fact, providing some kind of material assistance to Iran. We'll see ultimately what China opts to do when it comes to that crisis.
And one of the ways in which the Chinese might have communicated this is direct. And there's substantial evidence that indirect through third-party companies, Chinese military equipment is making its way to Iran. Details to be scrutinized there in the future, to be sure. What about future arms sales to Taiwan? Because the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, made it very clear that that's at the top of his list, and it was kind of a diplomatic flex in the president's direction to make sure he does not, from the Chinese president's perspective, misstep here.
Right. And on the flight back, he told reporters that he hasn't decided whether or not Taiwan will get about $14 billion in weapon shipments that Congress has authorized. The president has to sign off on them. He signaled that for the first time since the late 1970s, a sitting American president may reach out to speak directly with the leader of Taiwan regarding the weapon shipments. That is a big break with diplomatic norms, and in part because you don't want to upset the Chinese by having direct leader-to-leader engagement. But what the president signaled as well is that the sort of the norms that have been in place regarding the U.S., Taiwan, and China since the 1980s perhaps need to be rethought and updated. It was a Reagan-era decision that essentially has the United States continue sending weapons to Taiwan and not discuss that issue with China. What the president signaled today is he may be reconsidering that. But on the flip side, when you're talking about issues of democracy and of concern to the countries that aren't of the economic or military nature, there was the issue of political prisoners. The president suggested that on the case of Jimmy Lai, that major democracy activist from Hong Kong, the Chinese may be less willing to free him, but they may be open to releasing a gentleman known as Ezra Jin, a pastor who was arrested last October for his role in leading the underground Zion Church. Suggested that she may be open to releasing him. That case has earned a lot of attention and concern from this administration and others across this country for religious freedom reasons. But on Taiwan, that the president would signal he at least heard the Chinese president and maybe reconsidering the American position, that won't sit well with many very worried about the future of the China, Taiwan, and U.S. situation.
Ed O'Keefe, North Lawn of the White House, as always, thank you very much. California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna joins me now. He serves as the ranking member on the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. So, Congressman, let's pick it up from there. You just heard Ed O'Keefe summarize some human rights concerns, the Taiwan issue, and something that Boeing got out of this trip. I want you to give me your summary of what has happened the last 2 days in Beijing.
First, we didn't do enough for our manufacturers or farmers or workers here. I mean, I'm glad that China committed to 200 planes, but in his first term, Trump got 300 planes. And as you know, Major, the hope was that he would get 500 planes. He got no commitment from China to stop holding rare earths and critical minerals as a monopoly. They still may run out in supplying them to us at the end of the year. He got no commitment for them to stop their subsidies. And he took Wall Street leaders and other business leaders to beg for $1 trillion of investment in America for Chinese factories that would put more Americans out of work.
What about Taiwan? As Ed O'Keefe just described, the administration had indicated earlier this year $14 billion in arms sales. It hadn't gone through the State Department process, had not been formally notified to Congress, but it's still out there. And now the president at least has created some doubt about its future. How do you evaluate that?
I'm concerned about that. I voted for those $14 billion. It was bipartisan on the China committee. We affirmed the one China policy that China and Taiwan should negotiate the future of Taiwan as bilateral matter and in a peaceful manner. But what we are opposed to is China using military force or military coercion to go after Taiwan. And the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 is clear that the United States will support Taiwan to make sure that China does not use military coercion. The reality is, as people know, that China is tightening the noose around Taiwan. They have more of their ships patrolling the Taiwanese island. And in 1982, we offered Taiwan 6 assurances. One of those assurances was that we would not seek China's permission to provide them with arms. We should uphold those 6 assurances. They've held us well for decades, and I'm concerned that Trump may be compromising them.
And do you think that his equivocation on this future transaction, the $14 billion, will be perceived by Xi Jinping and those around him as, at least for the moment, a victory?
I do. Look, we've always had strategic ambiguity. Strategic ambiguity is about exactly what the United States says is going to do. But we've never had equivocation about the Taiwan Relations Act. We've always maintained on a bipartisan basis that the United States reserves the right to provide arms to Taiwan, to provide support to Taiwan, not because we seek war, but because we want to make sure that China doesn't use military force. And if China wants to meet with the KMT, as they recently did, KMT is the opposition party in Taiwan, and they want to discuss the future of Taiwan, fine, that's between them. We affirm one China in terms of diplomatic negotiation and conversation, but we will not watch a military coercion of Taiwan.
What about future U.S. business action in China? I read something today, and I'm not an expert on this at all, Congressman, but that Facebook had announced earlier this week acquisition of a Chinese company, and then the Chinese government blocked it or held it in abeyance. What's going on there?
Well, China has basically restricted our technology companies, our social media companies from having access there, for doing business there, not just to consumers, but also with their businesses. That is why it would be catastrophic for America to say, okay, now China, come, we want you to set up Chinese factories in the United States. I was at one of the American factories in Meadville, Pennsylvania, a glass manufacturer. They're having to compete with Fuyao in Ohio, a Chinese company. That Chinese company has undocumented labor. They're abusing labor. They're getting Chinese subsidies, and they're putting Americans in Meadville, Pennsylvania out of work. I don't want more of that.
There's an investigatory process any administration can do about what you just described. Is there one going on now under the Trump administration?
No, ironically, Biden administration was investigating it, and right now we're waiting for the report. So I don't want to be partisan. I'm hoping that there will be a report and there will be enforcement. But look, the president identified the problem. He was correct about the China shock. He was correct that China ate our lunch, that they took a lot of our manufacturing jobs. He convinced the American people he was going to stand up for them, stand up for the workers and manufacturers and farmers. I didn't see many of them on the trip. Look, obviously, every president takes business leaders, but I would have thought he would mix it up with some of the farmers and factory workers and manufacturers that he's been campaigning, saying he would protect for the last decade. And I'm saddened for them that he really was there with the global elite making deals with China. That's been the problem in this country.
You take great pride in California. It's the 4th largest economy in the world. Why is Tom Steyer the best person in California to be the next governor?
Yes, he has run the most innovative campaign, and he's said, I'm a billionaire, but I'm willing to pay more tax so that Californians don't lose health care. He's willing to look at single payer, especially when we have a AI world and people are fearing job loss. You should have health care not tied to your job. And he has a bold record on climate. But look, this race is going to come down to Tom Steyer and Javier Becerra and Steve Hilton. Steve Hilton will likely make it into the top two, and then one of our Democrats is going to make it. I hope it's Steyer.
California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
For months, President Trump has flirted with taking military action in Cuba. Tensions may escalate further as sources tell CBS News that the Justice Department is weighing the prospect of an indictment against the country's former president, Raul Castro. The move connected to the deadly 1996 shoot-down of planes operated by a humanitarian group. 3 Americans and a U.S. resident were killed. The 94-year-old Castro formally stepped down in 2021, but is still largely viewed as a powerful figure on the island. CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan joins me now. Margaret, separate from the indictment, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, was in Cuba this week. As I mentioned at the top of the program, there is a concerted effort, diplomatic, economic, and now potentially judicial, to pressurize the regime. What did Ratcliffe go there to talk about?
They're trying to engineer not necessarily regime change, but to change the regime's behavior. And it's unlikely.
Behavior modification.
In a pretty significant way when you're trying to steer a communist system away from being a centralized economy. But that's what they're attempting. The CIA director, I'm told, really tried to emphasize when he was sitting across from Raul Castro's grandson, along with the intelligence chiefs, that they should look to the Venezuela model as one of cooperation also possible here with Cuba. Now, I'm told that really means basically they're trying to control a transition of the communist state and have them go in the direction America wants them to. Now, they're trying to push them into a corner here by putting financial pressure on the military and intelligence leaders with sanctions. They're also dangling here $100 million in humanitarian aid that they'll give to the Cuban people, not the state. But that would provide some relief, particularly given the protests that we are seeing due to the energy crisis, partially because of the U.S. cutting off the oil supply as well. But the goal here is really to shift direction without triggering the kind of collapse and humanitarian crisis that would send thousands of people onto Florida shores.
But this is a topic you discussed with former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, is it not?
I did, and a former CIA director himself.
Yes, indeed.
And
yes.
he was surprised at the unlikely messenger. But I did ask him, is Cuba actually a national security threat? Take a listen. The CIA director was just in Havana meeting with Raul Castro's grandson, along with the head of intelligence and the head of the minister of the interior. The U.S. is offering Cuba aid. They're pressing for political change and floating the potential of indicting 94-year-old Raul Castro, who's no longer in power, but he's clearly influential. Does it matter to U.S. national security what happens on this island?
I think that actually the biggest risk is that we end up with another Mariel evacuation from Cuba that has tens of thousands of Cubans heading to the United States out of desperation, as happened a number of years ago. So I think that's actually, at this point, the biggest threat. You know, the Cubans have had a lot of security people in Venezuela. They formed the security cordon around Maduro. He didn't trust his own people. They've done this in other countries. So they have been involved in ways that impact our national security and our interests in their engagement in other countries for a long time. But are they an imminent threat to the United States? Other than in these, if you will, peripheral ways, I think the main threat is, frankly, is collapse.
Which the administration says they're trying to avoid.
Right.
This is part of the hemisphere-wide muscularity of the Trump administration, is it not?
It is, and this attempt to chase out China and Russia from, as they say, America's backyard, something we haven't fully seen happen yet in Venezuela, by the way. There's still a fair amount of Chinese and Russian investment there. But that's the stated intent by the Trump administration. When
you talk to administration officials, do they share any of what Gates talked about, this concern about a flood or
Yes.
even a small flood of refugees?
Yes, and that's something that I think is interesting because we have been hearing about the reporting around military planning, which would suggest something offensive. What I have heard more in the diplomatic space is military planning to prevent a collapse, to prevent the kind of crisis. Remember, that's a huge difference between Venezuela and Cuba, the proximity factor here. And so they don't want to trigger the kind of influx of refugees that, by the way, President Trump has tried to stop from entering America in the first place and made it much harder to claim asylum.
Great stuff, as always. Margaret Brennan,
Thanks,
thank you
Major.
so very much. You can watch more of Margaret's interview with former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Robert Gates on Face the Nation this Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern on CBS. We turn now to the Congo, where the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has confirmed a new deadly Ebola outbreak. So far, at least 65 people have died. CBS News medical correspondent Dr. Celine Gounder joins me now. She's an infectious disease specialist who spent time in Guinea as an Ebola aid worker during the West African epidemic. So, Dr. Gounder, you have real-life experience here. Quickly remind our audience why they are so legitimately fearful of Ebola and what we know about this current outbreak.
Well, the case fatality rate from Ebola is very high. It's in the 30 to 40%. So it's a very fatal disease. Now, there are certain aspects of this particular outbreak that have me and other experts quite concerned. One, it's in an urban area. In the past, most outbreaks have been in more rural areas, but the West African outbreak that really took off was in urban areas. It's cross-border, so it sits at the edge of the DRC, Uganda, and South Sudan. We've already seen one case in Kampala in Uganda, case and death. Kampala is a huge international hub for Southern Africa. In addition, you have a lot of migrant workers in the area, gold miners. And the other factor here is Bundibujo, which is the strain of Ebola we're talking about here. This is the third known outbreak with this particular strain. We have a lot less data on this one in particular, so have less information about the natural history here and how to manage this.
So, my recollection is in this circumstance, you need containment and you need to limit movement out of a potentially infected area. What are the capabilities of the African CDC to accomplish either of those two pretty important goals?
Right. Well, the African CDC is similar to our CDC in that they are not necessarily the boots on the ground capacity. They're providing technical advice and support. But yes, you're right. We don't have, in particular with the Bundibujo, we do not have treatments. We do not have a vaccine for this strain of Ebola. So you really have to focus on the basics. A lot of basics people might be familiar with now personally from COVID. So it's contact tracing, testing, quarantine if you've been exposed, isolation if you have the infection. And then other things that worked during the West African outbreak was safe burials, really making sure that people are not laying hands on a loved one who died and bathing them and preparing them for a funeral. That's where a lot of people have gotten infected in the past. So having safer ways of managing that. But, you know, you talk about people leaving an infection hot zone. It's also getting healthcare workers into the zone in order to provide assistance. And this is also an area where you have ADF militants. So it's dangerous to even try to get into the area.
Dr. Celine Gounder, really good stuff. I appreciate the perspective and expertise. Thank you very, very much. Still to come on the Takeout. What the Supreme Court decision on the abortion pill mifepristone means. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins me now, or later, after the other side of the break, to explain. Also, Michigan Democratic State Senator Mallory McMorrow joins the Takeout to assess her bid to the U.S. Senate and how she views the crowded Democratic field of rivals. Also, my new championship ring from San Diego Padres fantasy camp. Lessons of friendship and baseball, well, kind of sort of immortality. Not really, but felt like it to me. Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. Supreme Court Thursday issued a decision that will allow the abortion pill mifepristone to continue being sent through the mail, at least for now. It blocks a lower court order that would have prevented mifepristone from being prescribed via telehealth and sent through the mail, including to states with total abortion bans. CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, this is a complicated one. Many are, but this one is acutely complicated. Is what the Supreme Court said yesterday the final word?
This part is not complicated. This is not the final word. This was a rocket docket or shadow docket decision, as you know. And what the court really said is, while this case plays out, this is a suit brought by Louisiana. As you said, the Fifth Circuit had implemented a stay. While this case plays out, people can still get mifepristone through a telehealth appointment in the mail. I think that there is every likelihood that the merits of the case, not whether the drug companies are entitled to emergency relief, but the merits of the case make their way back to the Supreme Court.
And what are the merits of the case? Is it a challenge to an FDA alteration of an existing policy that occurred during, if I remember correctly, COVID 2021?
That's exactly right. So there was a change to the FDA rules. Previously, you needed an in-person appointment to give mifepristone. During COVID, obviously, it was much harder for people to have in-person appointments. And so the rule was temporarily changed. It was, I believe, in 2023, right after the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, that the FDA said that that change in the regulation could actually become permanent. Louisiana then brought a suit, and part of what they're arguing is that it undermines their ability to ban abortion, because if the FDA says, well, you can get this abortion pill in the mail by telehealth, then it undermines Louisiana's essentially outright ban on abortions.
And therefore undercuts their state rights to carry out state policy as their legislature has deemed it proper.
You never need to come to my constitutional law class. That's exactly right, and therefore undermines their states' rights. In addition, as you know, there's a separate but related argument that the FDA basically rushed this decision, that they didn't go about it the right way. And the Trump administration had actually taken kind of a, I don't want to say middle approach, but the Trump administration had said to the courts, let's wait while there's a study into the safety of mifepristone, into how it was approved to be used via telehealth and mail. And so the Trump administration was not arguing for a ban on telehealth and obtaining mifepristone by mail right now. They basically said, let's wait a minute while that study is confirmed. But you're exactly right. Louisiana is arguing this is our right as a sovereign. It's a health, safety, and welfare rule, and FDA don't undermine that.
Very quickly, remind our audience, Jessica, of how widely used mifepristone is.
So it is widely used. It's one of the two pills that's used in abortions in this country. I believe that about 2/3, it might be about 65%, as of the last good data I saw, of abortions in this country are achieved by using by a medication abortion. And I think upwards of 90% of those 2/3 are achieved by using mifepristone in addition to one other drug.
So if you're a woman in that category, Jessica, what should you be thinking in the next year or so?
So obviously looking at this case carefully, because one of the really interesting things, I know this is in the weeds, but I know that you like legal weeds as well, is the question as to whether or not, if the Fifth Circuit says the FDA went about this the wrong way, why that would apply in the entire nation. Because as you know, and we talked about, the Supreme Court said no nationwide injunctions. That's because this case, what we were just talking about, is partly brought under the Administrative Procedures Act. That would allow a court to vacate the rule with respect to the entire country.
Jessica Levinson, great stuff as always. Thank you very much. Coming up, the Democratic primary for the Senate race in Michigan is heating up with less than 3 months to go before the election. I'll speak with one of the candidates, Mallory McMorrow, next, right here on The Takeout. And let me welcome you back to The Takeout. It's a tight, for now, Democratic primary for the United States Senate in Michigan. State Senator Mallory McMorrow, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, and former candidate for Governor Abdul El Sayed are all polling pretty close. However, some recent polls suggest what might be a surge for El Sayed in the August 4th primary. Mallory McMorrow joins me now. It's great to have you with us. Why a surge for al-Sayed, and what do you have to say about his candidacy?
Yeah, what's clear in this moment is that Michiganders are looking for a fighter, and there are still a lot of voters who are just tuning in to the election. I'm the only candidate in this race who doesn't just talk about fighting, but actually has a track record. I beat a Republican incumbent to get into the state Senate in 2018, then helped flip our entire chamber to Democrats for the first time since 1984. And as majority whip, I've delivered every day on affordability, civil rights, voting rights, expanding access to reproductive health care, making it easier to start a family. And I'm very confident once we get to talk to voters one-on-one, face-to-face, there's going to be no doubt that I'm the best candidate to take on Mike Rogers and beat him this November.
According to the polling data, and I know that's subject to change, let's acknowledge that up front, Mike Rogers is leading all three of you. Does that concern you?
We need to be very clear-eyed that Michigan is a battleground state. Mike Rogers almost beat Alyssa Slotkin in 2024. He's got Trump's full backing from day one and tens of millions of dollars that Republicans and dark money groups are pouring into the state to try to buy this seat. He will be a formidable competitor. But I know that we are battle tested. We're tough. I've beaten Republican incumbents before. I know how to do it, and I'm going to do it again.
Speaking of dark money, since you brought it up, any of that flowing in your direction? Because I've read reports that the answer to that is yes.
No, certainly not.
None. No, not through consultants, not through campaign arms that help support you or support candidates like you. No dark money at all.
No, we have staff that work with other candidates through other organizations, and it's an entirely normal way that we run campaigns.
Okay, so I'm not going to sit here and litigate with you about California or what you said about the Midwest in an earlier part of your life, because you've said those tweets, which CNN found, represent your authentic side. And authenticity counts in the coin of the realm in modern American politics. What I don't understand, State Senator McMorrow, is if authenticity is your coin of the realm, why delete them in the first place? Why not let them stand and let people make up their own minds on an authentic basis about who you once were?
Yeah, it's a great question. Every now and then, people clean up their social media accounts. We didn't target any old tweets. We mass deleted everything before 2020, as did my opponent, Abdul El-Sayed. I chose Michigan after living all over the country, and I can tell you there is no place I've ever felt more at home. Michigan welcomed me with open arms. My daughter was born at the same hospital where my husband was born. This is where I got engaged. This is where I got married, in Detroit's Eastern Market. And I ran for office for the first time almost a decade ago because I wanted to make this a place where my daughter would stay. That's what I heard in my first campaign. People were actually excited that I had moved to Michigan and chosen to stay. And I heard from a lot of voters who said that I reminded them of their daughter who had left Michigan, and they wanted to know why I came and what we could do to bring their kids back.
What is the authentic explanation for why Donald Trump won Michigan in 2024?
The authentic explanation is he understood that people are pissed off. And for my party, the Democratic Party, that needs to be a reckoning. We cannot continue to do the same old things and expect that people will trust us. I have been calling for new leadership in our party. And what I know is that people are looking for somebody who gets it, who didn't build their entire life in politics. I actually went to college to become a car designer. I graduated in 2008, quite possibly the worst time in American history to try to start in that career. And I had no job. I had no health insurance. I had thousands of dollars in student loan debt. And it took me a long time to dig out of that hole. And I bring that experience with me into this work to fight every single day to make life just a little bit easier for people who are trying to do everything right.
So you're a no on Charles Schumer to be continued Democratic Senate leader. Who would you support instead?
I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I have been explicitly clear. Yes, I believe we need new leadership in the Senate. And I am looking for somebody who fits the blueprint of exactly what we did here in Michigan. We took on tough fights in our state Senate, running great candidates in places we shouldn't have won, including my district back in 2018. Then we helped flip the entire state Senate for the first time in 40 years. And when we got power, we actually did the things we told people we were going to do. We took on tough fights. We became the first state in 60 years to repeal right to work. We restored prevailing wage. We repealed the 1931 abortion ban. We protected clean air and water. And my litmus test is going to be who fits that blueprint, who recognizes that this is no longer the traditional Republican Party, but that it's a MAGA party. And it requires a very different response, not just to win, but to rebuild faith, not just in Democrats, but in democracy.
Two quick questions. In or out? Filibuster, in or out?
Out.
Electoral college, in or out?
Out.
State Senator Mallory McMorrow, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, our CBS News radio flashback today brings us to 2003. We'll hear how radio listeners first heard of the tragic Space Shuttle Columbia disaster, one of the deadliest space missions in history. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Now for our CBS radio clip of fame. In our hyper-digitized world, it may be hard to appreciate, but radio news still has an immediacy and intimacy that is very hard to match. When big news breaks, it still takes time for TV to respond. Trust me, I have been deep inside the response blender when things are spinning at a breakneck pace and producers, cameras, and crew need to be stood up immediately. And it's still in that immediacy takes time. Radio is often faster and fresher, as it was in heartbreaking fashion the morning of February 1st, 2003, when the Space Shuttle Columbia re-entered Earth's atmosphere above Texas and Louisiana and en route to what was believed to be a scheduled touchdown in Florida.
This is a CBS News special report. The landing of Shuttle Columbia. I'm Peter King at the Kennedy Space Center,
through Merritt Island Tracking Station,
where Shuttle Columbia is supposed to be touching down just about 2 minutes from now. The voice you're hearing in the background is that of James Hartsfield at Mission Control in Houston. Let's listen in just for a second.
Now instructing controllers to
because there is a problem.
Contingency procedures and begin to follow those.
There is a problem. Nobody has heard a word from Shuttle Columbia in about 14 and a half minutes, just after 8 o'clock, just after 9 o'clock, excuse me, Eastern Time.
No tracking data.
And there is no tracking
radar
data.
At the Merritt Island Tracking Station has been reported of any objects.
We don't know what has happened. This is not a good sign. And we are just going to stand by for a few seconds and see what happens. If you're just joining us, this is a CBS News special report. I'm Peter King, live at the Kennedy Space Center. Shuttle Columbia was supposed to be touching down here in about a minute, but we have not heard, or I should say NASA Mission Control has not heard a word from anybody aboard the shuttle since just after the top of the hour, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central in Houston at Mission Control. They are not receiving any tracking data from Columbia. They have not received any voice communication from Columbia. And the trademark sonic booms, which we would normally have heard here in the Kennedy Space Center area, we have not heard a word. We have not heard a boom, nothing, no sign of tracking. They are trying with local radar here, the Mila Merritt Island Tracking Station, which would normally have acquired the signal from Columbia some 13 minutes or so ago, has not seen a thing.
All 7 astronauts aboard Columbia perished in that tragedy. It was the orbiter's 28th flight and the 113th for the Space Shuttle fleet. All Space Shuttle flights were suspended for 2 years in the aftermath of that catastrophe, that delayed construction of the International Space Station. There would not be another shuttle flight until July 2005. with modifications to avoid another re-entry thermal disaster, the one that doomed Columbia, as you heard it on CBS Radio News. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. In January, as some of you might recall, I went to Padres fantasy camp, and I had the time of my life. In the aftermath, I urge anyone watching this show to go to do that thing that you've always wanted to do, but you know that you have put off. That advice still stands. Whatever it is, and you know what that thing is, I'm telling you, damn it, go do it. You won't regret it. Now, my fantasy camp experience was personally epic and fulfilling on at least 100 different levels. It did not need a championship ring, but I got one anyway. Every member of my team got a ring courtesy of the San Diego Padres. Now, you may remember, this is the important part, my longtime producer, and even more important, my dear friend Arden Farhi joined me at fantasy camp. Now, unlike me, Arden is a great athlete and an excellent baseball player, as evidenced by this highlight, one of the pivotal plays of the fantasy camp championship game that we won.
It's gonna drop, 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 it's gonna drop.
In Padres fantasy camp lore, that will forever be known as simply the catch. It smothered a burgeoning rally and helped us go on to win the championship. And this year, for the first time, the Padres gave out fantasy camp championship rings. No, these are not diamonds, but they look pretty sweet nonetheless. Arden is with me now as we bask in that championship glory and feast for at least a moment or two on our bling. Arden, and you've even shown me up with the Padres uni. That's great stuff. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. You got to represent.
You got to represent. You got to represent.
Not just on your bling.
And no, ladies and gentlemen, we will not be wearing these around town.
You might not be, but I'll speak for myself.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, who knew this was going to happen?
And what was fantastic, we all went back to Petco Park in San Diego, all of us. Getting our team back together was so great. We have an orthopedic surgeon from Alaska.
Yep.
Former San Diego Police Department Chief of Police, Shelley Zimmerman. Ron Jones, an actor.
Sports guy
in San Diego at KFMB.
Yep.
Jake. All of us together on the field before the game, and we got our championship rings. Up on the Jumbotron, the first and only time in my life on the Jumbotron at Petco Park. Never again. I'm sure that's going to happen. Pretty cool stuff.
It was great. It was a great day. It was perfect San Diego weather. Got to watch the baseball game.
Saying.
Yeah, right. It's kind of redundant, right? Got to watch the baseball game afterwards. Padres won, which is very exciting for all those concerns.
Yes, exactly.
And it was just overall just a cherry on top of what was already a great Sunday.
One quick, how'd you make the catch, Arden?
I think I explained this the last time I was on.
I want to hear one more time.
I was playing shortstop.
Yeah.
It was a fly ball. It went up into the sun. Run.
Yep.
Look up. Don't see it. There it is.
All you see is the sun.
Reach, grab it, and well, you see the video evidence.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Arden, championship ring in hand.
Yeah.
Thank you, my brother.
Be careful. There's a lot of.
Be careful. A lot of heavyweight. Very heavy. Very. Makes a lot of noise. Happy Friday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever, with bling, at least for one day. The Daily Report coming up next.